When it comes to financial planning, there's really 6 disciplines: investment planning, tax planning, retirement planning, estate planning, cash management, risk management. Sounds like a lot of stuff. Could be a couple-day seminar. So a lot of information. We can't really cover that all in one evening. I asked Shafik to share a couple of strategies and ideas with you tonight. Get his bio up here. And we can't really cover off everything, so he's just going to go through a few ideas and hopefully give you some insight into a couple of strategies. Shafik's one of our division directors, and he's also part of our senior executive financial advisor team in Alberta. He's been over 14 years with Investors Group. He's done over 100 seminars in the last year. So I was at a seminar of his last week at an oil company downtown, so he's always doing seminars. So he's very well versed at speaking. A couple of strategies he talks about are the psychology of wealth, so just trying to understand the psychology behind building wealth, and the third option, another strategy that he's term that he's coined. You may have seen him on the monthly show called Wealth Creation on Global TV. Also, he's received many awards at Investors Group. Top advisor in Alberta for the last 5 years, national division director for the past 4 years, also ranked in the top 1% of advisors in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Shafik Hirani.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me okay, or is this loud enough? Not loud enough yet? No? How about now? Okay? Are you taking notes already? Or are you doing the feedback evaluation? I'm just going to take my jacket off. I tend to sweat when I lie. Why are you here? It's not a mandated audience, is it? It's not a forced audience. Nobody forced you to be here, right? I think it's important when we talk, we understand that people have different modes of communication, and the question of why you're here is important because when you communicate, there's what's called an encoder and there's what's called a decoder. And the person listening, it's important that we frame and we understand why we make certain decisions. See, I starved when I first started. I've been in the industry since 1995. When I started, 1995 was like year of Lorena Bobbitt, year of O.J. Simpson. It's tough to build a clientele when you start. And so what I did is I went across Calgary primarily, and I would give presentations to senior centers. And I would speak at Confederation Park, and I would speak at some, and I don't know if you guys know anything about senior centers. It's like 80 to 20 girls to guys, and the guys don't want to come out to a seminar on financial planning. They're dating like 5 girls at once. So I would present to these senior centers, and what happened is one day a guy came in, sat front row, and the guy was like 250 pounds. He's huge. His name was Gerard, and he was wearing jeans, blue stubble. You know, he had blue jean jacket on, yellow boots. And he goes, Sharif, I want you to speak to my boys. And my name is Shafik. I'm not going to correct the guy. He was huge. And so I'm trying to build a clientele. This is 15 years ago. And I said, okay, fine. I'll go speak to your boys. When do you want me out? He goes, well, come out on Sunday. And I said, well, Sunday, okay, fine. So I said, okay, fine. I'm going to go. He goes, Shafik, I want you to show up at 7:30. Now, I'm not a morning person, but whatever. I'm trying to build a clientele. It's difficult to build a clientele when you first start in our industry. So I said, okay, I'm going to go out to Hanna, Alberta, 7:30 in the morning, drove out, brought my assistant, my wife, went up, showed up at Hanna, Alberta. We ended up walking in a room like this, completely concrete, no plugins for a computer, nothing, and 200 construction workers standing there. Gerard runs one of the biggest steel mills in Hanna. I don't know if you guys know anything about construction, but they tend to drink on Saturday nights. I brought like 6 donuts. And so he ended up becoming a very good client, and he taught me a lot of what I didn't know about how you attain a certain level of wealth. But I want to express my gratitude, first of all, to Brian. Like, the way Gerard introduced me is he goes, okay, everybody shut the bleep up. And then he goes, okay, guys, don't you do to this guy what you did to the last guy. And he goes, okay, money guy, you're up. And right before that, my assistant comes in, she's crying. I'm hiding behind the screen because I'm nervous as heck. And she goes, you know, these guys, I don't know if they're being honest. And I said, why? What's going on? She goes, well, read the registration list. And the first guy's registration, his name is Fred. I said, well, what's wrong, honey? There's nothing wrong with that. And she goes, well, read the next four. The next four were Betty, Wilma, Bam Bam, Pebbles. So, you know, it is tough to build a clientele. We're going to change a little bit of gears today, and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit. Oh shoot! Get my face off this thing. Yeah. How many people here heard of Pavlov? He won a Nobel Prize in 1895. He was testing glandular responses in dogs. Turns out that he comes out with a whole new paradigm shift in the way people financial plan, a whole new approach. And his, not just applying to planning, it applied to human psychology. He would test dogs. Dogs would salivate when they were fed. We've all heard the story. It came up with what's called classical conditioning. That was what's called stimulus response psychology. The reason I asked why are you here is because often, I don't know if you've ever been in the situation where you've like read a good book, or you've seen a good movie, or you've like seen a good presentation or something like that, reflected back 3 months later and you have done nothing that that book told you to. Anybody been in this situation? Sure. The problem is we're conditioned. We're conditioned to get some information and go back. And by the way, it's actually not a bad idea that you were taking notes. You know, I'll tell you, a lot of times you'll see an advisor, and the advisor will say, well, listen to what I'm saying. You know, those people, they don't understand how we communicate. The way we communicate is, if I'm going to say something, there's something called selective attention. Selective attention means everything I say, you're probably going to get about 50% of my message. Here's the problem. There's something on top of selective attention. Out of 50% of what I say, you're going to get, there's something called selective retention. Selective retention, that means you're going to retain 50% of what I say in the short term. You're going to retain 10% of that 50% of what you heard in the long term. The problem with that message is it gets even worse. There's something called selective perception. Whoops. Selective perception means that out of everything I say, it doesn't matter. What matters is why you are here. Because we tend to distort and change reality to suit our fragile ego. We all see the world through one set of lenses. We all see the world through one set of eyes, and we tend to change reality to suit our eyes, our comfort zone. And so to make any kind of change when it comes to investments and how do I get rich, it takes certain levels of awareness. And we guard our gates of change very, very tightly. We don't open them. They can only be opened from inside. When it comes to money, if we're going to make any change on how we actually get to a certain place financially, we have to develop certain attributes that we're not used to developing because we've been conditioned to protect ourselves from these attributes, like ego, like humility. I don't have an agenda. I don't like PowerPoint. I never have. The problem with PowerPoint is it conditions people. Go, get something out of it, walk away, you know, that was good, it resonated with me, or it didn't resonate with me. You're intelligent people. So I thought we could just chat and just treat it like a fireside chat. This is sort of our message. And I do want to thank Brian. Brian's been very humble. Brian is the regional director for Investors Group. Our company has 2 million clients. We have 5,000 advisors. Brian's branch, which I'm a part of, has about 100 to 150 staff. And he runs well over $1 billion. So the invitation to come up, Brian, thank you very much, to share the stage with somebody like Peter Drake, who's forgotten more about economics than I'll ever know, it's an honor. The message we're trying to make is that we might want to look at a paradigm shift in the way people think traditional investment advice works. There's been a lot of paradigms since a paradigm is what we believe, right? So there's always been paradigms, and there's always been shifts in every area. There's been shifts in psychology, like when Pavlov was discredited by Freud. There's shifts in technology, like splitting the atom. The Earth isn't flat anymore. Galileo said the Earth isn't. Copernicus said the Earth isn't the center of the universe. There's lots of paradigms. We wrote an article called "The Hypnosis of Financial Conditioning," and it's a really interesting article because it shows people how we tend to get conditioned to go towards middle class. We're in a world where your advisor is going to tell you to max out your RSPs and pay down your mortgage and tell you it's going to get to a certain level of affluence. We're in a world where the advisor says throw money into an RSP for 30 years, so when you cash it out, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket. I don't want to be in a lower tax bracket when I retire. Psychologists have a term, they call it a locus of control. A locus of control means that we as people have a desire for two things. We've got this desire to be controlled, and we have a desire to be out of control. When it comes to money, our belief in this paradigm shift about traditional financial planning is that people make the mistake of having what's called an external locus of control. External locus of control means most people think, you know what, I'm going to be happy if I get a pay raise. I'll be happy when my mortgage is paid off. I'll be happy if my investments don't go down in value. If you want to attain a level of happiness, you must shift that locus of control to what's called an internal locus of control. But it's easy to say. Like, it is easy to say, but a lot of us don't do it because we don't know how. After Pavlov, a guy comes along named Freud. Freud said, you know what, Pavlov, maybe things are wrong. This is around the 1930s. Freud said, you know how people make decisions? The problem is we're not really based on our conscious mind. The mind has something called an ego and a superego. And you know what? We have something called a subconscious. So if you take a look at an iceberg, in Freud's new theory replaced what's called classical conditioning or cognitive therapy, and he called it psychoanalysis. Freud said we have three aspects to our personality when it comes to how we decide and what motivates us to take certain actions. One is called our conscious mind, and the conscious mind is basically what we're aware of. The second is called the id, and the id is what motivates us. And in the id, there's something called, oops, sorry about that, sorry about my writing, I should have been a doctor for God's sakes. It's the subconscious. The three aspects of our personality, Freud said, is we have this ego in our conscious mind. This line here, which represents the water, is our superego. The superego's job in us is to protect us from reality. So Freud said, you know, when it comes to money, when it comes to how we act, when it comes to our health, when it comes to our relationships, the superego's job is to distort reality. So we're not as in touch with our subconscious mind as we think we are. Why? Because we got the superego. One of the things the superego does, and is generate what's called defense mechanisms. The first step towards getting to a certain point of wealth is avoiding defense mechanisms like blame, justification, transference. It's a major change in the way we view how to invest and how to create wealth. We don't look externally. We have to start looking at the person in the mirror. We have to start looking internally. Here's the problem. The problem is the brain, this superego is designed wrong because our brain is designed to think very linearly. We think, okay, I'm here now. I want to get here, and I want to be rich. So it's all up here, isn't it? Like, I want to start here at point A, and I want to get here. And so this is my life. I start here, and I work towards this goal, and I work, and then 80% of people we know by our statistics that investors end up middle class. Nobody asks why. If 80% of people are starting at one point and trying to get to another point and ending up middle class, we must ask why, in my opinion. Here's our message. our message is that this paradigm has to create another shift. The idea is you must start here and work backwards. Anybody heard of Pythagoras? Shortest distance between 2 points? The brain is not designed to think linearly or holistically, but we know intuitively you can't build a puzzle without a picture of the box. Can't build a house without a foundation, a blueprint. What we need to do if we're going to set up is we need to look at our whole lives holistically. That's how you get to a certain level of wealth. But the problem is the brain is designed to make us fail. 1969, when JFK put a guy on the moon, what he said is, he said, well, here's the Earth, here's the moon. I ain't going to just leave the Earth towards the moon, because if he's going to start with the moon's orbits and gravity and costs and work backwards. If he missed the moon by 10 meters, if he missed the takeoff by 10 meters, he missed the moon by 100,000 kilometers. And we live our lives this way. We're conditioned to. Little discrepancies take us way off path. The problem is we don't know how to make decisions. Here's our 2 typical decisions: yes or no, panic or chill. This is how we decide. The brain is designed to think this way. If we take a look at how the brain is designed, how many people here think that there is a physiological change, a physiological difference between the rich and the poor? How many people think that there's nothing different between the rich and the poor? How many people think that there is something How many people would not put their hand up if their life depended on it? How many people think that there is a physiological difference between the rich and the poor in the mind? 30%, 40%? How many people think there's no difference? Wow. After Freud came another guy in 1935. They give the Nobel Prize to a guy named B.F. Skinner. After Skinner comes a guy named Carl Jung. But Skinner talked about, he was the first guy to introduce what's called neural mapping. Neural mapping is when they start putting what's called a fMRI. Anybody heard of functional magnetic resonance imaging tests? fMRI tests or stuff like that? They started doing that, and they started testing how people decide, how people make decisions. One of the aspects in the paradigm that we try to stress is that you have to learn how to get into the right frame of mind. So if you take a look at how our brain is designed, the brain is broken up into 4 basic quadrants. There's a right and a left. There's a parietal lobe. Let's just call this a right, left, a front, and a back. So if you take a look at the left side of the brain does different stuff than the right side of the brain. This is important because a lot of people don't understand how we come to decisions and why we make these decisions. The left side of the brain, it does stuff like math, logic, analysis. This left brain is our analytical brain. Down at the back, it does analysis. It also is our linear thinking brain. It's also more of our conscious mind. This is the side that we consider the smart side of the brain. Since I was a kid, I graduated high school at 16, I started university at 17, I was told time after time, you got to read this book on math, and you got to read this book on taxes and psychology, and you got to read this book on investments, and all I did is read book after book after book with this belief that it's going to get to some level of success or some level of some design. And it does the exact opposite in our opinion. Here's the problem. Since I was a kid, this side of the brain has been glorified. This right side of the brain is what they call the lizard brain, or more of the subconscious mind. This is the side of the brain that thinks more holistically. A lot of people don't understand what the right side of the brain does because it's really not understood. It was called the subconscious mind. Well, they're starting to understand it over the last 30 years. They're doing what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging testing, fMRI tests on the brain. So what they do is they put you through a bunch of electrodes and they figure out what lights up when we decide. This center down the middle is called the corpus callosum. This center is where all the neurons transfer the fastest. On these fMRI tests, or these functional magnetic resonance testing, they're finding some really interesting things because they analyze all socioeconomic statuses of people. Poor, rich, white, black, old, men, women, everything. And so they find a really interesting thing. They find that there actually is an area called the amygdala. Well, I mean, they've known that for a while, but they find that the amygdala is physiologically different in the masses than it is in the affluent. So that's a shocking discovery. So wait a minute, you're telling me the brain is different in rich than it is in poor. And they also found this in the Human Genome Project, that the brain, there's actually a God gene, there's the belief, a propensity to be more addictive, a propensity to be more gay, that kind of stuff. So they said, wait a minute, if this gene exists, what does this gene do? This is right in the amygdala. The amygdala on the left side does something, is our fear center. Has anybody heard of like fight or flight responses in animals, that kind of stuff? It's actually fight, flight, or freeze, because the left side of the brain is our negative frame. It's not negative like negative people. It's negative, they just coin it the negative side of our brain. Yet we are taught that this is the side that's going to make you rich. This left brain does fight or flight or freeze, paralysis by analysis. I don't know if you've ever walked away or missed out a good investment opportunity. That's your left brain thinking. This right side of the brain is more of our subconscious mind, our holistic mind, and the amygdala is actually physiologically bigger in rich. It's also physiological, and they define rich as people with $3 million of liquid cash in the US. It's also physiologically bigger in sports athletes, super elite athletes. It's also physiologically bigger in leaders, on average. So then the question they go is, well, wait a minute, what does this do? What does this left amygdala do? Do you know what it does? Whoops, sorry about that. It does pattern, whoops. You know, I was in Toronto last week in front of 800 people and this thing broke on me, so let's hope yeah, it is again. With pattern recognition, it does pattern recognition. What that means is the right side of our brain, our amygdala, reads, it does body language, but it also is, and they gender bias. In women, they call it intuition. In men, it's gut feel. This is a side that makes decisions. Our feelings start at our brainstem. They come in through our eyes, and they go right to the back, and then they come up to the front. That's how we see. We feel before we see. This amygdala is physiologically bigger in rich because it does pattern recognition, and it does two other things. One is called initiative. The other is called imagination. The affluent tend to have these attributes. The ability to make decisions based on kinesthetic responses, gut feel, the ability to take action, the ability to imagine. Here's the kicker. You know what they find? This propensity to attain a certain level of affluence is, so they go, wait, is it nature or nurture? They find that it's a little bit of both. So what that means is that we have the ability to develop or enhance this size in our brain by releasing certain endorphins, by taking certain actions like moving from an external explanatory style to an internal. Not only that, but we can pass this down to our kids. We can pass the propensity for an attainment of affluence down to our kids if we learn how to think better. It's shocking. Here's the problem. People don't understand how to make these decisions. It's really easy to say, you know what, I understand that I need to talk to myself better. I understand that I need to take more accountability and not that there's a subconscious mind. And I understand, and I know myself pretty good. How many people here think they're a better driver than the average person? Everybody does. We don't understand how to make change. And the problem is we're designed. Carl Jung comes up and replaces Freud a little bit. And Freud said, you know what, our motives are fear and greed. Carl Jung says, you know what, there's 6 competing cognitions when it comes to how we decide about money. One, you guys have heard of and they're all opposing. So you've heard of type A and type B personalities, or like introverted, extroverted people. There's also what motivates is one is pain and the other is pleasure. This is what motivates people. Here's the problem. I am more motivated by pain by 200%, 2 times more than I am pleasure. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to lose money. And we combine that motivation, that fear, that lack of pain with our external explanatory styles, like I don't want to be fat, I don't want to be heavy, I don't want to be a smoker. If I tell you don't think of a blue bunny rabbit, You know, I'm golfing with the boys. What do they say? Don't focus on the water, Shafik. Our ideas on how we think keep us in what's called a comfort zone. We sit in this zone, and this comfort zone we live in our whole lives. And here's what the tests on people. People will move up, and they will cross levels of this comfort zone, and they will take action to move themselves back into this comfort zone. Even if it's to the positive, and if they cross on this barrier here, these are our pain thresholds, both positive and negative. Fear of success, fear of failure. So we live our whole lives in this comfort zone. Question is, how do you break out of it? How do you become aware of it? Especially when it comes to our finances, because that's sort of the purpose of our talk. Well, the first thing we have to understand, and if we're open to it, the first thing we have to understand is that perhaps the old paradigm is flawed. Perhaps your advisor is conditioned to tell you what he has been told to tell you. Max out your RSPs. That'll make you rich. Pay down your mortgage. That'll make you rich. Diversification does not create wealth. Concentration creates wealth. Maxing out your RSPs does not make you rich. It makes you not poor. I've been doing this for 15 years, guys. I know. I'm going to show you how I've made some of my money. Now, I will tell you a couple things I believe. I will believe the old paradigm is flawed, because if you take a look at the old paradigm, here's what the old paradigm is. Max out your RSPs. Look at external things, because you'll be happy when you get a pay raise. You'll be happy if the markets go up. You'll be happy if the economy does good. You need an advisor. You need investment advice. You got to manage your time, right? You got to manage your time properly, because time is money. Stress, avoid stress. Stress is bad. I disagree. I'll tell you the new paradigm, and I'll tell you what we're going to share a little bit. One, RSPs, yeah, they're good, but they don't make you rich. They make sure you don't go poor. You don't need advice. I'll talk about that later. Time isn't important. It's managing our energy. Life isn't a marathon. It's a series of sprinting and then resting. I know it sounds a little bit hokey, but bear with me for a couple of minutes here. Stress isn't bad. You know, when I go work out, my wife, she says, you know what, Shafik, you must stress your muscles to failure. The mind and the body are very connected. If I can develop emotional or physical resiliency in my body, can't I develop emotional resiliency in my mind by stressing them to failure? Why can't I develop, if I can develop physical capacity, why can't I develop emotional capacity? But this message is very lost in the investment community. We were laughed at for years. Nobody laughed at our message until suddenly certain people started taking advantage of our message. And this message has resonated with our branch, and it's the kind of message we want to pass on this new paradigm of how you actually get to investing. And here's one example of a new paradigm. Too many people don't understand how to treat themselves. You must treat yourself like a stock. When it comes to money, let's go through some investment strategies. One, everybody is told to pay down their RSPs and max out or pay down their mortgage and max out their RSPs. Here's what your advisor is going to say. Let's add up your income and your expenses and your assets and your liabilities and figure out what your net worth is. You know that. Everybody knows that. You don't need somebody to tell you that. If I analyze a stock, if I'm going to analyze a company like Royal Bank, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say, what is Royal Bank trading at today? So Royal Bank, I don't know, Royal Bank's at $50. Well, if I'm going to go buy shares of Royal Bank, I'm going to say, well, will I make money on this stock? You know how I analyze Royal Bank? I say, well, what is Royal Bank making? Royal Bank's making like $4 billion. And that's good. Well, and they have $2 billion in expenses. So they have $2 billion in net income. So Royal Bank what they do with that net income is they take that money and they reinvest it in Royal Bank, because they have what's called a return on their equity of 20%. So they're loving it. They reinvest it back in our own company, and I'll get a 20% rate of return. But I own a piece of Royal Bank. I'm a common shareholder. I own a piece of that company. What am I going to say? No way. Pay me some of the dividends, right? So I say, okay, well, give me a dividend. Royal Bank's dividend says, fine, we'll give you what's called a T5 out of sorry guys, a T5 and we'll pay out of retained earnings. And the Royal Bank says, okay, we'll give you a 4% yield. So if I'm going to pay $50, that means I'm going to get $2. 4% of 50. Now, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to pay $50 for $2 back, right? The analyst, what he does is says, well, you know, you're probably going to get a dividend next year, and at 20% ROE, that dividend is probably going to be $2.40, $2.80 the year after, and so on. And so what we do is we take the present value of all those future dividends, and we say, well, what is Royal Bank worth? And if the present value of the future dividends is $60 and Royal Bank's trading at $50, I should buy it. If the present value of the future dividends is trading at $40 and Royal Bank is at 50, it might be a little bit overvalued. Why don't we treat ourselves like that? Why don't we take a look at ourselves, not just in terms of what our net worth is, our assets minus our liabilities, but the present value of our future income? If I have $300,000 in RSPs and 200 grand of equity in my house, that's fine. I have $500,000. That's my net worth. But if I'm making 100 grand and spending $80,000, I have $20,000 in net income. What can I do with that money? I am the present value of that future income. See, as an analyst, I got to say, okay, well, let's compare Royal Bank to other investments. Let's take a look at TD. So what I do is I say, well, Royal Bank's got how many shares outstanding? About 500 million shares outstanding. And so if I'm going to spend $50 on Royal Bank, I take a look at that price and I divide it by the $2 billion in earnings and the 500 million shares in outstanding. That gives me $4 in earnings per share. Well, 50 divided by that $4 in earnings per share gives me a price to earnings multiple of 12.5 times earnings. But none of us, no people treat themselves like a company. What about our debt to equity ratio? What about our cash flow from operations? What is our present value of our future income? What is our liquidity ratio? What is our price earnings ratio? That's how we must learn to treat ourselves, because companies make themselves big. People don't. People are conditioned by their financial advisor to max out their RSPs and pay down their mortgage and think that's it. Maybe buy some real estate. I'll show you how I made a bit of my money. I'll show you what we must do. But one of the differences in paradigms is start treating yourself like a company. When we started, that Gerard guy, the guy I gave the presentation to, he ended up investing a lot of money with me. And he became a mentor of mine. And you know, I asked him where he made his money, and it was all of it in his business. Where do you think most people make their money right now? Everybody thinks there's two options, right? And here's what happens. You come to me, and I'm going to say, all right, let's take $100,000 and thank you very much, and I'm going to create a portfolio for you. And I'm going to say, you know what, you probably should be in middle risk investments because things are scary, but things are good. I don't know. So let's assume for a second I put you in a middle risk investment. So that means we have some fixed income. How I get paid, how your advisor gets paid is you take this 100 grand, you invest it with him, he's going to put you in fixed income investments and equity investments. He's going to create a portfolio for you. So you get professional management, you get liquidity, you get diversification. We have 2 million clients. Let's say 200,000 are in this pool. There's $5 billion in this pool. The fixed income investments are going to grow like this. The equity investments are going to go like this. So if the fixed income does 6 and the equity does 10, your portfolio is going to get less volatility and do 8. And 8's good. I was having lunch with our vice president in Toronto last week. I was telling him that we should change our motto to, we lose your money slower than everybody else. But he didn't really think that was funny. If you give me $100,000, I'm going to say, okay, I can get you 8% if we go middle of the risk. And you say, okay, Shafik, I'm a long-term investor. Let's invest $100,000 for 10 years. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get you back. All good. I'm going to compound that $100,000. And I'm going to say you're going to get $215,892. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with this. This is what everybody does. Where do you think all my clients made their money? Not the traditional way. All my clients with 5, 10 million bucks, nobody did it this way. Where do you think people make their money? Real estate. Real estate's one of them. Real estate's good. Actually, you know what? This is what everybody thinks the second option is. Real estate. So here's how real estate works. And guys, I believe in real estate. I know your advisors often tells you not to buy real estate. Well, I'll tell you why. It's because you don't give us the money. Buy real estate. It's wonderful. I own 10 properties. They've made me way more than my RSPs. So if I'm an average real estate guy in Calgary, I'm going to go buy a condo, and I'm going to rent it out, right? So what am I going to do? Do you know what the average condo price of a condo is? I want to compare apples to apples, so I got $100,000 for 10 years. That $100,000 is going to put it as a down payment on my condo. I don't got to put it all down, but what is the average condo price in Calgary? Does anybody know? Yes, ma'am. No, it's much higher, much higher. 360. 360. The average condo price in Calgary, and sorry, I shouldn't say average. You're right, average is a little lower. It's median home price that they measure. The median home price in Calgary is $360,000. Did you know Calgary's growth rate over a 10-year period is exactly the same as the global growth rate? So if I'm going to compare my $100,000 investment traditionally versus just putting $100,000 down here and walking away from it, that means I got to basically carry a mortgage of $260,000. Take $100,000. Are you guys following? Does this make sense? So I got to find a renter to pay that mortgage, because if I can rent out this $360,000 condo and I can rent it out for, if I carry a mortgage on it, sorry, the rent, the interest itself will be about $1,400. So I got to cover the interest on this mortgage by finding a renter. What else do I have for expenses on a condo? Sorry, what was that? Yes, yes, absolutely, very good. Condo fees. How much are those? Yeah, 300. Property taxes, thank you. How much is that? 150? Yeah, good. Anything else? Insurance, good, thank you. How much? $30, $50? Condo fees including the insurance? Not in my world. Let's just add another couple $100. So we need 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, $2,000 a month. $1,950. $1,900 a month for 10 years straight. Now, let's just assume for a second that we can get a renter to give us $1,900 for 10 years straight with no toilets breaking. Well, I know we're living in la-la land a little bit. So if we can do that, we have now a $360,000 condo that's covering the mortgage, interest only. If I project this condo, now let's assume I'm not a good realtor, I'm not a real estate picker, I'm not a bad real estate picker, I'm not smart, I'm not dumb, I'm average. If I'm average, I'm going to get 5% capital appreciation on that property. This is the global growth rate of real estate. This is Calgary's growth rate as well. A $360,000 condo, if we compound that at 5%, it's going to grow to $586,000. Pay back my mortgage of $260,000. $326,000. Which one's better? The bigger number is always better when you're investing than the smaller number. Real estate works. I know people have different opinions about it, but let me show you what I do with my money, because I'll show you what I do with some of our clients' money. I'll show you what you might want to consider, but put on your seatbelts because this is a bit unique. So I was watching this commercial. And anybody, have you ever seen that commercial where there's a guy, he's eating like a jar of peanut butter. He comes around the corner and he bumps into a girl that's eating a chocolate bar. And the chocolate bar breaks, falls in the peanut butter. They both take a bite. And they both come out with, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's This commercial saved Hershey's. They came out with the Reeses peanut butter cup, came out with terms like synergy. The tagline of that commercial was sometimes you can combine two ideas and get an even better idea. Well, let's take a look, because all of my clients that got to a certain level of wealth, everybody always thinks that there are only two options: real estate and traditional investing. So if I take my $100,000, let me just create a slide here. If I take $100,000 and I'm going to walk away from it, let's try this. Let's take $100,000 and put it in an annuity, or something that's going to generate like a dividend type investing, yielding investment. So I take $100,000, I invest it. Let's assume for a second that that $100,000 I'm going to cash out and create a cash flow equal for the next, we're looking at 10 years, right? So I take $100,000, invest it, I'm going to cash it down to zero. So if I cash it out, I can cash out $10,000 per year for 10 years. Does that make sense? Okay, now we're in getting some dividends. This money's invested, so I ain't going to get just the 10 grand. I'm going to get another $5,000 in interest. So I now have a cash flow of $15,000. So when I was a kid, I took $100,000, I went and I invested it. Now what I did is I went to the bank and I said, Mr. Banker, will you please lend me some money? The bank says, no, you don't got any money. I'm not going to lend you a dime. I said, well, what are you talking about? I'm the present value of my future dividends or my future income. He said, nope, you're not. So I went and I said, well, what if I lent you, what if I secured it with an investment? What if I took that, whatever you lent me, and I gave you security? They said, well, was it liquid? I said, sure, we'll make it liquid. And they said, well, fine, we'll give you a rate, we'll give you a loan, but we'll give you a loan at 5% interest. Well, my credit wasn't great, so I said, okay, fine. To figure out how much they would lend me, $15,000 divided by 5% means they would lend me $300,000. So I took that $300,000 and I invested it. So I took that $300,000 and I put it. Now I'm going to tell you guys, if you do want to try this strategy at home, find somebody to help you do this. I invested it in something, I did very well, but my advice is put it in what's called a principal guaranteed note. So I went and I bought what's called a principal guaranteed note. And I linked it to the bank. The bank had their collateral. The $100,000 just paid for this loan every single year, the $15,000 in interest, and I walked away. So now I have this asset growing like this, and I have a liability growing like this. If I'm going to borrow money to invest, the basic idea is that I have to earn higher than the cost of borrowing. Now let's assume for a second that we continue to get that middle risk portfolio at 8%, that $300,000 investment, 10 years later, whoops, sorry about that. $650,000. Pay back my $300,000 loan, I'm left with $350,000. Here's the kicker. That money is liquid, the principal is guaranteed. The success rate on this strategy is 95%, but nobody does it. Here's something else that's interesting. Revenue Canada's got this rule, and the rule is that if you borrow money and if you invest it, that interest is tax deductible. Not like the RSP tax deduction, which in my opinion isn't even real, because if I put money into my RSPs, you know what happens when I'm older? I actually pay tax on that money. It's not deductible, it's deferred. This is a pure deduction. I paid on this is purely deductible, that $15,000. So if I'm, whoops, sorry guys. If I'm in a 40% tax bracket and I have a $15,000 interest expense on a loan, I write that off on my taxes. I can save 40% or $6,000 a year. So I get my tax slip for $6,000 a year. I claim it on my taxes, $6,000 a year for the next 10 years. That's $60,000 on top of my profit. What was my profit again? $350,000? $60,000 plus $350,000 of profit is $410,000. So let's go through the math on this, because if I'm going to do this, the first question I'm going to say is, well, what can I lose? What do I got to do to break even? How much risk am I really taking here? So the first thing is we know the $100,000 in the traditional way grew to, does anybody remember? Like 200 or something like that? 215, thank you. And, oh, I didn't even look at the real estate. And the $100,000 in the second option grew to 326. What does the $100,000 in this one grow to? Same assumptions, 350, 410. So we coined this thing. We called it the Reeses peanut butter solution. Unfortunately, that's copyright infringement, so we called it the third option. Won a bunch of awards. It actually turns out to be a good strategy. The question is, if I borrow $300,000, what could I possibly lose? So we have to do some analysis, and we have to figure out, if I were to borrow $300,000 and pay 5% interest on it, that means it's costing me $15,000 a year. If I'm paying $15,000 a year in interest, then, and I'm in a 40% tax bracket, so I can write that off at $6,000, that means my net cost is $9,000. If I'm going to pay $9,000 on a $300,000 investment, then I have to make 3% to break even. If I make $9,000, I didn't make any money, I wasted my time. Companies do this all the time. Companies, what they do when they're creating wealth is they calculate what's called a weighted average cost of capital. What is my debt to equity ratio? What is my cost of my preferred shares? People don't do this. People don't treat themselves like companies and create a debt to equity ratio. People don't even buy one extra property. If you buy a property in Calgary, and if you bought it 10 years ago, I will tell you, you are richer than if you didn't. But the middle classes don't buy more than one property. We don't buy a duplex. If you buy a duplex, you're upper middle class. You know anybody that 10 years ago that bought 10-plex commercial properties? That's how you get to a certain level of wealth. You know, it doesn't matter where you go. You could be in India, Jakarta, China, Japan. You look at 10-year rolling averages. Anybody that's bought a 10-plex, the percent chance of success is 90% that they're multi-millionaires. Same as this strategy. It's actually 95%. What I like about this is it gives us a little bit more cash-rich and not asset-rich and cash poor. Here's a couple of things. When you're setting up a plan, the mistake most people make, I already talked about it, is that everybody's trying to get from here, point A, income minus your expenses, assets minus your liabilities, to point B, which is basically 10, 20, 30 years from now. And we're working in this direction. We also know that 80% of people are going to end up middle class. And your advisor, and most advisors say, listen, you're going to get there, but you just got to take my advice. My advice, because it's worth so much, you got to pay $300 a trade to do that. You know, guys, I can log online right now if you guys want. I'll log online with my BlackBerry right now. I will open an account with E-Trade. I'll take out my credit card. I'll put $100,000 into that account. Then I'll open up another web browser. I will get another website. I'll get advice from Warren Buffett. And let's say Warren Buffett's telling me to buy trains or something. I'll put that $100,000 into that E-Trade account and trade that for $6 a trade. You're telling me I need advice? I need a plan. See, what happens is we don't plan for our money, and the plan can't be up here. The plan's got to be written. And to break a comfort zone, we need certain emotional attributes to be brought out. We need to feel angry. We need to make actual decisions. See, the problem is, if you remember, here's what happens. Even after we die, the money has got to be guarded. We've got to learn how to protect our money. Here's what happens in real life. If Fred is married to Wilma, and Fred dies, everything goes to Wilma. If Wilma dies, everything goes to Fred. If they both die, everything goes to Pebbles, right? This is the way most people's wills are written. This is the law. You know what happens? Remember how I started. I was speaking at senior centers on how to maximize your return on your fixed income investments. Fred dies, Wilma remarries Barney. And Barney has got a son from a previous marriage named Bam Bam. Well, who do you think dies? Wilma. Who do you think gets Fred's estate? Barney and Bam Bam. We have to look at more than just how do we create our money. We have to look at things like in our will, adding something called a capital beneficiary trust. That's our message, is that there is a new paradigm on how you create a certain level of wealth. It is tragic that people think they have 300 grand in their RSPs and they're okay. If you're making 100 grand a year, $300,000 in your RSPs is 3 years of income. And so our philosophy is that you need a written plan, and we really are convicted in that. You know, in that plan, I started when I first started. One of my biggest clients, he owns that. I don't know if anybody works downtown, but he owns that that hair salon. You know, they charge like $150 for a haircut. I don't know what the hell. So he charges $150 for a haircut. This guy had a lot of money with me, and I would visit him, and I would walk into that. I don't know if you guys have seen Bankers Hall. He's paying an astronomical amount of rent in Bankers Hall. He owns the biggest place on the main floor. Every time you walk by, I would see music, and there would be lineups, and there'd be people there, and it was just fantastic. He had like 30 hair or whatever he calls them working for him. And one day I get this phone call, and the call is, you know, Shafik, I want to cash out half my portfolio. And this is a significant amount of money. So I went, and I was like, okay, well, that sucks. I'm cashing out your money. I went and delivered the check personally. And I walked up to the guy, and I said, you know, I'm so sorry. Like, what's going on? And I walked in. His haircut place was empty. Empty. And I said, what's going on? He goes, well, Shafik, look across the street. And across the street from Bankers Hall, there's that, I won't say the name, but it rhymes with Duper Cuts. And so at Duper Cuts, across, there was a big lineup of people outside in the main hallway, and it's packed. And on the sign, what did they have? A big sign on the window saying $10 haircuts. So I said, I'm really sorry, man. Here's your check. Walked away. 3 months later, I get it all back, plus a bunch more. So I'm ecstatic, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he's saved himself from bankruptcy. How did he do it? So I went out and visited the guy, you know, and it is back to the old. There's a lineup out front. There's people. There's music. It's wonderful. Everybody's all excited. He's dancing around in his own way, like he does. And I said, well, how'd you do it, man? And I looked at across the street, and the other competitor was going out of business. Cobwebs, doors closed, empty. And he goes, and I said, how did you do it to him? And he goes, you know what? You see that $10 sign in the window? Look at the sign in my window. So I walked around, and the sign on his window was, we fix $10 haircuts. Well, that's kind of what we do, guys. Our approach is strictly financial planning. One of the things we do is we fix $10 financial plans. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys got something out of it. You guys have a super day. Thank you.